Member for York West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to congratulate my colleague on his comments. He's worked very hard on many of those issues, knows them well, and he, as myself and others in the House and out of the House, are clearly very disappointed in the so-called budget 2013. I have to say, you know, I look at this and I don't think it's worth the paper it's written on, and it's just too bad that we didn't have the money that went into putting out all of this books that they've done and all of the ads that we know will come. If they could have taken those that money and put it back into helping Canadians, I think it would have gone a lot farther than produce another advertising document, which is what this one is all about. And it seems like, you know, Canadians coast to coast to coast are sending us emails and tweets and the rest of it about their concerns and their disappointment that there's very little in that budget other than recycling a bunch of things. Andrew Coyne, who writes very critical of the government and of the opposition, so he's no friend of anyone in particular except Canadians, said that the budget is bloated, cynical, and incoherent. So much of what is wrong with this budget, he said, simply amounts to extending previous programs or implementing past initiatives that they had already committed to do. Even the Prime Minister's favourite friend, Doug Horner, who's the Finance Minister for Alberta, said we don't have any new money for the types of programs that the Prime Minister has put in this budget. So clearly there aren't going to be these new programs because the provinces don't have the money to match them. I was also struck by the commentary by the National Citizens Coalition, a group that the Prime Minister served as president of. Mr. Peter Coleman, current president, said this budget plan seeks to grab headlines for relatively minor initiatives. It's also discouraging that the government was not willing to commit to more far-reaching tariff reform. There's also an article on the front page of the business section of the Globe about what touching those tariffs that were adjusted in this budget will have a significant impact on many other avenues of resources and things that come in that have a tariff on them, to the point where it will seriously hamper many of the retailers here in Canada. So it seems that the government missed the mark again. But now I want to be fair. There are the few items, as I mentioned earlier, about the reduction of the tariffs on baby clothes and hockey equipment. But they needed to look at much more thorough. All they do is the government does is touch those little things that will get them a little bit of positive publicity. And the ones that really needed to be touched and looked at and examined that would be Canada be better off, they didn't touch them at all. Canadian families now owe a record of $1.67 in debt for every dollar of income. And Budget 213 is not going to help middle-class families that are struggling. And rather than have the minister go and try and effect the changes to the interest rates, that would clearly affect a lot of Canadians out there that have huge mortgages and credit card debt. And it was that 40-year mortgage commitment that the government made, even for a short period of time, that certainly helped drive the amount of debt that many Canadians are feeling. But one of the issues that's we often talk about here is the employment issue in and amongst our youth. We're facing the worst youth job market in a generation. That means for many of our young people getting out of school, there aren't going to be the jobs out there. And what does the government, and we've been talking about this for at least 2 years now, and what does the government suggest? Well, they're going to invest $19 million in an advertising campaign, but they will not be creating any new jobs or any new skills for youth. So, of course, we know how much the government likes to advertise their partisan ideas on the public dime, so I'm sure we're going to be hearing lots more of that. By 2015, the government will have spent almost $1 billion to advance their economic inaction plan during events like the Super Bowl. So much for accountability and transparency that we supposedly are talking about. Everywhere you go, you cannot go 50 feet without seeing another one of these economic action plan ads. And for most of the people that I talk to, they know it's their own money, that instead of investing it in people, they're doing more of the partisan propaganda. They should be ashamed of themselves every time they see those signs. But youth employment is being ignored almost as much as the job market in general. Canadians want a real plan to grow the economy and create Canadian jobs. Instead, the Conservatives are repackaging existing programs taking more money out of the economy and calling it another action plan. Well, in this budget, the Conservatives have prioritized spending cuts ahead of strengthening the economy and creating new jobs. We all know that the job market is still rebounding from the recession that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance promised would never happen. You know, we were never going to run into a debt and we were never going to get into a recession. 2 months later, the recession's here, and they'd already blown the $13 billion that surplus that they'd already had as a result of the Liberal government. But despite the assurances, young Canadians now have an employment rate that is 5 points worse than it was before the recession. So we risk creating a lost generation of youth, unable to move out of their parents' home, saddled with unimaginably high debt, and no meaningful job experience. Budget 2013 should have included a real plan to help Canadians, young Canadians specifically, but it isn't in that budget at all. So now the Conservative henchmen say that Budget 2013 announced infrastructure, training and manufacturing programs to kickstart the economy. But what they won't admit is these aren't new programs. The Conservatives are using Budget 2013 to rebrand programs that were already existed. When we introduced the gas tax some years back as a Liberal government, yes, and I acknowledge the fact that it's indexed, and I think that's a good thing. But when we introduced, you know, we're always being told about who voted for what and the rest of it. Well, when we introduced that as a Liberal government in our budget, the current Conservatives, not as many as there are now, they voted against the gas tax. So, but today I have to say I'm pleased that they indexed it, except that instead of being $5.5 billion moving forward, it's been reduced to $3.3 billion. So it makes it much more difficult for our municipalities to move forward. Everywhere we go, the infrastructure pressures are there. And the government acknowledged that it's a huge thing, but you can't expect the cities to be able to deal with that. The provinces are under a huge amount of debt, and so to say, well, we're going to do a variety of things in partnership with them, well, they don't have the money either. And nobody wants to have to raise taxes, but it's what you do with the money that you have, where your priorities lie, that are the things that matter. Budget 2013 says, hurry up and wait budget. And that's about what it says, because in 5 years, we are going to create jobs. In 5 years, we'll have more money for infrastructure. In 5 years, we'll be able to do a variety of things, but not today. But speaking again of the whole skills training issue, I'm sure the Prime Minister must have been disappointed because he talked so much about how they were going to answer these problems and come up with these solutions, and all they came up with was a whole lot of hot air. The Conservatives have invested a small amount, just over $1 million, to harmonize the recognition of skilled trades credentials across the country. Yet they have done nothing to increase the graduation rates of apprenticeships. And one of the most critical barriers to improving the supply of highly trained workers that we have in Canada that we need, many of these young people end up dropping out of the apprenticeship program because they don't have enough money to keep going. And over 40% don't end up finishing the programs. And that's clearly, when you do the investigation, it's because they didn't have the money to continue. Inadequate financing is a big issue that, again, is not addressed here when we talk about the big skills shortage, and we all acknowledge that we have it. Again, why not take the money and put it into helping people so that they can get jobs and that they can move on to buying homes, move out of their parents' homes, and start investing themselves. But they can't do it if they don't have a job. And as the government spends hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising to buy Canadians' votes, they should be thinking about those many young people that are looking for jobs and looking for the government for some leadership, rather than passing down all kinds of ideas and deals, except that the provinces have to match that money or companies have to match that money. Well, you know, a lot of them don't have that money, so all of those jobs, I don't think they're going to materialize. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for allowing me to speak about this nothing budget that I have in front of me. I just wish I could get the money out of this budget so that I could take all that money and put it into helping Canadians get jobs.
Questions and comments? L'Honorable Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Montmorency, Charlevoix, Haute-Côte-Nord.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to know what the Liberal Party thinks of the choices the Conservatives have made. For example, with the current deficit of about $26 billion. Since 2008, it's been deficit upon deficit, and yet they claim to be great managers of the economy. And on the other hand, they've been providing tax credits to business for years, $60 billion in this budget alone, without requiring those businesses to reinvest in our society. And that's why we still have a deficit today. What does she think of the choices the Conservatives have made? The Honourable Member for York West.
Well, thank you very much to my colleague. Well, clearly we have a different ideology about what the role of government should be. And I guess I have to start with the choices that our Minister of Finance made when he was, it was that same group of individuals who drove Ontario into a massive deficit as well. And the exact same thing is happening here now, and they'll just continue. It's about choices that you make. And I would tend to think that Canadians want us to invest money into advancing the future so that we have people who can get those jobs, we have young people who can finish apprenticeship programs, and that they can get the jobs. Instead, what we're doing is spending more money than has ever been spent. We've got a huge deficit, and it's all you got to do is go back into history and see what was going on with this same Minister of Finance when they were elected in Ontario, and of the kinds of problems we ended up with, and the deficit and the debt that ended up to be there. So they're doing the exact same thing for the whole country that we're currently dealing with. So I'm appalled at their decisions. I'm more appalled at the $1 billion that they will have spent on economic ads when people are looking for jobs.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for her observations. Currently, the federal government transfers $500 million a year under labour market agreements to the different provinces. With this Canada Jobs Grant, they're going to pull back $300 million of that $500 million to conveniently create a fund for themselves to deploy what they call the Canada Jobs Grant, which will require the provinces to contribute $5,000 for every skilled worker and an employer to contribute $5,000. I've heard that the Finance Minister for Alberta and the Finance Minister for Ontario have already indicated that they're not even likely to participate in this program because the provinces don't have any money. I'm wondering if my honourable friend can comment then on the true effectiveness of this notional skills training development through the Canada Jobs Grant.
The Honourable Member for York West.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that was a big disappointment. Certainly, we've been talking about the youth employment strategy, the need for one. We've been talking about changes to the EI. I mean, this is nothing more than a continued attack on the many people that want to work. To say that we'll create this new fund, and then the provinces who don't have the money, and when Alberta, who does so well out there, says it doesn't have the money, that has to tell everybody, what about the other provinces? If Alberta and Ontario don't have the money, and they are supposedly our richest provinces, if they don't have the money, no one else is going to have it either. So all those fictitious jobs that are going to be created out there, I don't think we're going to see one. And again, it goes back to if people are unemployed, they can't find work, they're having to live at home. I think that's bad for the economy, because if people have jobs, they spend money. They buy houses, they get married, they do all the things we want them to do. And I think that's a much better investment than economic ads.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for